What takes place when America's beloved film star shares a stage with one of daytime TV's most outspoken and polarizing personalities, and the exchange spirals so far off course that it ends in a shocking walk-off no one anticipated. The scene that unfolded would soon be remembered as one of the most jaw-dropping clashes ever broadcast live. The day had begun routinely at the bustling studio of The View in New York City. Sandra Bullock arrived ahead of schedule for what was meant to be a breezy, upbeat segment promoting her newest movie. Relaxed and cheerful, she sat in the green room with a cup of coffee, going over key points with her publicist. There was no hint that within the hour she would be caught in a storm that would dominate headlines and social media feeds. As the cameras switched on, The View opened with its usual energy. Whoopi Goldberg greeted the actress warmly. "We're thrilled you're here. Your new film sounds fantastic. Tell us all about it." Sandra responded with her signature grace, her easy smile lighting up the set. She thanked them for the invitation and described the movie as a deeply personal project centered on redemption and fresh starts. She spoke about resilience, about how people can rebuild when life throws the unexpected their way. Sarah Haynes leaned in with genuine curiosity, asking what inspired her to take on the role. Sandra answered thoughtfully, explaining that everyone faces moments of doubt or failure. The character's journey, she said, reminded her that transformation is always possible. It is never too late to choose compassion over bitterness, to mend relationships instead of destroying them. The audience listened attentively, clearly drawn in by her sincerity. Yet one voice at the table had remained conspicuously silent. Joy Behar watched closely, her expression tightening as the conversation progressed. Viewers could sense a shift, though they could not yet identify its source. When she finally spoke, her tone cut through the warmth that had filled the studio moments earlier. "Since you're talking about mending fences," Joy began, her words measured but edged with skepticism, "I have to bring up some of your recent remarks about the industry. Some critics might say your outlook is overly optimistic, maybe even unrealistic." The sudden pivot caught Sandra off guard. Her smile dimmed slightly as she asked for clarification. Joy pressed on, dismissing the idea that everyone is capable of change. She suggested that some individuals are inherently self-serving, unwilling to improve because they benefit from remaining exactly as they are. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whoopi Goldberg adjusted in her seat, visibly uneasy. The audience, which had moments earlier been relaxed and engaged, now sensed the undercurrent of confrontation. Maintaining composure, Sandra answered carefully. She said she believed most people, when given space to reflect and grow, strive to do better. Growth, she insisted, is possible when accountability and self-awareness are embraced. Joy responded with a sharp laugh, repeating the word, most, as though it were naive. Some people, she argued, double down on their flaws, hiding behind their achievements while portraying themselves as victims. The exchange no longer resembled a promotional interview. Even for a program known for spirited debate, this felt different. There was a personal sting in Joy's words, something that seemed disconnected from the film being discussed. Sarah Haynes and the other co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances as the tension thickened. Attempting to redirect, Whoopi suggested returning to Sandra's upcoming projects, but Joy was not finished. She questioned the idea of redemption, raising the issue of responsibility. "What about those hurt in the process?" she asked. "When someone claims to be finding themselves." The implication hung heavily in the air. From the wings, Sandra's publicist signaled urgently, clearly concerned. Still, Sandra chose to respond directly. She affirmed her belief in accountability, stating that forgiveness does not excuse wrongdoing. Instead, it frees individuals from being consumed by resentment. Holding on to anger, she explained, often damages the person carrying it more than the person who caused it. Joy countered swiftly, her voice climbing in intensity. "It is easy," she implied, "to speak about forgiveness from a place of comfort and success. Not everyone has the luxury of distancing themselves from the fallout of others' decisions." The studio audience sat frozen. Camera operators hesitated, unsure whether to continue focusing on the confrontation or shift attention elsewhere. The tension was now unmistakable. Sandra's calm demeanor began to harden slightly, her tone steady but firm. She stated that if there was a specific grievance, it would be more appropriate to address it privately rather than using a national platform to launch accusations. The remark drew an audible stir from the crowd. Joy responded with open mockery, suggesting that talk of goodwill was hollow in an industry where, in her view, smiles often conceal betrayal. She accused unnamed figures of advancing their careers at the expense of others, only to later adopt a moral high ground. Though no explicit names were mentioned, the insinuation was unmistakable. The co-hosts appeared increasingly alarmed. What had begun as a routine appearance had transformed into something raw and deeply uncomfortable. The boundaries between professional discourse and personal grievance had blurred. Sandra, who had arrived expecting to discuss storytelling and inspiration, now found herself at the center of what felt like an unresolved vendetta. Viewers at home would later describe the segment as surreal. The clash unfolded in real time, without the protective filter of editing. It was not merely a disagreement over philosophy, it carried the weight of years of frustration surfacing unexpectedly. As the confrontation escalated, it became clear that this was no longer about a film or abstract ideas about change. It had turned into a moment of reckoning, broadcast live for millions to witness. Sandra inhaled slowly, visibly steadying herself as she attempted to remain composed despite Joy's increasingly volatile conduct. She kept her posture straight, her tone controlled. She explained that she had come to discuss her new film, and to engage with the viewers at home. Whatever frustrations Joy might have been experiencing, she added, did not belong in this setting. The phrase, personal frustrations, seemed to ignite something. Joy's voice trembled with outrage as she fired back, challenging the notion that this was merely personal. If they were going to talk about motives, she said, then perhaps it was time to examine Sandra's public image. What about the carefully curated humanitarian persona? What about the high-profile charity appearances that conveniently aligned with press coverage? Joy suggested that some celebrities treated philanthropy like a publicity tool rather than a genuine commitment. The accusation lingered heavily over the table. Sunny Hostin looked stunned, her lips parted in disbelief, while Alyssa Farah Griffin stared at Joy as though witnessing an entirely different side of her colleague. The atmosphere had shifted from tense to explosive. Sandra's calm exterior began to show signs of strain. She responded firmly, stating that her charitable involvement was deeply meaningful to her and not something she treated lightly. She made it clear that questioning her intentions without evidence was unfair and irresponsible. Her voice, though controlled, carried unmistakable hurt. Joy let out a sharp, humorless laugh. She claimed decades of experience in the entertainment world had taught her how public relations worked. According to her, celebrities often attended a handful of glamorous fundraisers, wrote sizable checks that conveniently doubled as tax deductions, and then received glowing headlines portraying them as selfless figures. She implied that Sandra fit that mold. The phrase, "people like you," cut through the air. Sandra's expression hardened instantly. She asked what exactly Joy meant by that remark, her voice now cool and edged with steel. The words were no longer soft or conciliatory. Joy did not hesitate. She said she was referring to individuals who carried themselves as morally superior, who floated above the chaos while others struggled in less glamorous trenches. She criticized the way Sandra spoke about mercy and redemption, as though delivering wisdom from a mountaintop. Then she asked pointedly where that compassion had been when it was truly needed. Silence consumed the studio. Only the faint hum of production equipment and distant street noise could be heard. The audience seemed frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing an argument or a professional meltdown. Behind the scenes, staff members signaled urgently to producers, searching for a way to regain control of the broadcast. Sandra spoke slowly, measuring every syllable. She said she genuinely did not understand the allegations being thrown at her. Joy had something specific to address. She should either clarify it plainly or retract the accusations. Vague insinuations, she insisted, were damaging and inappropriate. The suggestion of an apology triggered another surge of anger. Joy's voice rose sharply as she mocked the idea. She accused Sandra of embodying the very entitlement she had been describing, arriving as a guest and expecting unquestioned admiration, while promoting what Joy dismissively called a sentimental movie about redemption. At that point, Whoopi Goldberg stepped in, her voice firm and authoritative. She reminded Joy that the program was a shared platform and that Sandra was there as an invited guest. The conversation, she said, needed to be reined in immediately. But Joy appeared beyond restraint. Something within her seemed to have ruptured. Years of frustration poured out in a torrent of grievances. She snapped at Whoopi, declaring that she had carried the program on her back for years while others received recognition. She claimed she was the one willing to confront uncomfortable truths and challenge hypocrisy without fear. Sandra's patience finally thinned. She demanded clarity. What hypocrisy was being referenced? What, specifically, was she being accused of? She urged Joy to state her claims openly rather than hiding behind suggestive language. In a sudden burst of movement, Joy pushed back her chair and rose to her feet. The abrupt gesture drew a collective gasp from the audience. She declared that she was exhausted from watching celebrities receive praise for minimal efforts while outspoken critics were condemned for honesty. She railed against what she described as artificial sweetness masking an industry that remained ruthlessly competitive beneath its polished exterior. Sarah Haynes quietly pleaded for her to sit down, her voice barely audible amid the escalating tension. Joy refused, pointing directly at Sandra. She said she was done pretending, done smiling through what she perceived as injustice. The accusations intensified. Joy suggested that Sandra's success was not purely the result of talent or integrity but of navigating, and perhaps exploiting, a system that favored certain appearances and personalities. She implied that countless others might have been overlooked along the way. That was the breaking point. Sandra rose as well, her composure finally giving way to visible frustration. She stated that she would not remain seated while her character was attacked based on unspecified grudges. She declared that she had worked diligently for her career, and would not accept baseless claims undermining her integrity. The confrontation now stood at full volume, two women facing each other across the table, neither willing to retreat. The rest of the panel appeared stunned, caught between loyalty to their colleague and discomfort at the spectacle unfolding live. The once promotional segment had transformed into a raw clash of egos, ideals, and unresolved resentment, broadcast without delay to a nationwide audience. Rather than retreating, she appeared to plunge further into her anger, as though admitting any validity in Sandra's words would be unbearable. Her eyes burned with intensity, and her tone turned sharp and cutting. "You really believe you're enlightened?" Joy said, her voice laced with hostility. "You act like you've figured everything out, just because you've managed to remain adored and in demand. Let me explain something about surviving in this industry." She paced her words deliberately, leaning into each one. Staying visible, she argued, sometimes requires embracing the role of antagonist, demands saying what others are too timid to voice, challenging narratives that make people comfortable. And sometimes, Sandra responded with striking composure, it simply means being unkind to people who haven't done anything to deserve it. That response seemed to detonate whatever restraint Joy still possessed. Her expression twisted with unfiltered fury. In one abrupt motion, she grabbed the microphone pack clipped to her clothing and tore it free, the wire snapping audibly under the force. "You know what? I'm finished," she declared, her voice echoing across the stunned set. "I'm done with this program. I'm done pretending I care about opinions from people who wouldn't survive 5 minutes outside their protected bubble, and I'm especially done being lectured by someone whose toughest decision is which charity event to grace with their presence." The studio descended into disorder. Producers gestured frantically from behind the cameras, debating whether to cut the broadcast. Audience members murmured in disbelief, some gasping openly. The remaining hosts sat motionless, struggling to process the eruption unfolding before them. "I quit," Joy announced, projecting her words toward the rafters. "I refuse to keep being the lightning rod for controversy, while everyone else plays it safe. I'm tired of being labeled the villain simply because I'm willing to raise questions others avoid." Sunny Hostin finally spoke, her voice tentative but urgent. She urged Joy to pause, to sit back down and breathe. She suggested that the situation could still be repaired, that emotions were simply running high. "A face," Joy scoffed bitterly. "This isn't some fleeting outburst. This is decades of resentment surfacing all at once. I've watched this business reward mediocrity while punishing blunt honesty. I'm done pretending that's acceptable." Through the turmoil, Sandra rose slowly to her feet. Despite the whirlwind around her, she carried herself with measured dignity. "Joy," she said evenly, "I sincerely hope you find whatever support you need, but what happened here today wasn't bravery or truth. It was an unprovoked attack on someone who arrived with respect and good intentions. That isn't authenticity, simply wrong." Joy locked eyes with her, breathing hard. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her expression. Perhaps doubt, perhaps regret. But it vanished almost immediately, replaced by hardened defiance. "Keep your sympathy," she shot back. "I don't need guidance from someone who thinks forgiveness is a cure-all. Some wounds aren't meant to heal that way. Some people don't earn redemption." With that, she turned abruptly and strode off the stage. Her notes remained scattered on the table beside a half-finished cup of coffee, silent reminders of the long tenure she had just abandoned. The cameras continued recording as the set absorbed the shock of her exit. The other hosts sat in stunned quiet, the usual energy of the show completely extinguished. The audience seemed uncertain whether to clap, whisper, or remain still. The bright studio lights now felt harsh, illuminating the raw aftermath of what had just occurred. Sandra gradually resumed her seat, her expression controlled though clearly shaken. She turned toward Whoopi Goldberg and spoke softly enough that the microphones barely caught her words. She apologized that viewers had been subjected to such a volatile scene, noting that the confrontation seemed rooted in issues far beyond the conversation they had been having. Whoopi nodded slowly, still absorbing the magnitude of the moment. She offered a formal apology on behalf of the program, acknowledging that the situation had spiraled into something unacceptable. She commended Sandra for handling the ordeal with composure that exceeded what anyone should reasonably be expected to maintain under such circumstances. Around them, production staff finally signaled to transition away from the chaos. The decision to cut to commercial was made, and the broadcast shifted abruptly, leaving millions of viewers staring at their screens in disbelief. The dramatic exit marked a stunning turn in the history of The View. A tenure spanning more than 2 decades had ended not with a farewell tribute, but with a storm of anger and unresolved tension. The outburst would quickly ripple beyond the studio, igniting debates across social platforms and news outlets about professionalism, authenticity, and the fine line between candor and cruelty. On the set, however, the immediate focus was recovery. The remaining hosts sat quietly, gathering themselves before the cameras would return. The earlier warmth of the promotional interview felt like a distant memory, replaced by a heavy stillness. Sandra maintained her upright posture, determined not to let the spectacle define her appearance. Though visibly affected, she remained poised, embodying the very composure she had spoken about earlier. The moment had shifted from confrontation to reflection, leaving behind an indelible imprint on everyone present.